Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Had a president traveling to Chicago. Big speech on the economy. Bidenomics, now the buzz of the town. And look, I give the president credit. About time. I think he's been listening to the show. Got to go out there and tout what you're doing. Got to talk about what you're doing. Got to show the successes. I know there are a lot of people out there going, this is going to, when history looks back, this is going to be, one of the most consequential presidencies, in our lifetime because of, all the things that he's doing and all the work that Jelly Bucket Joe's showing up and doing. You got to get out there and talk about it. Yeah, that's the future. This is the now. And the now is, Builder Biden came out and talked about it. Look, my economy. Middle out, bottom up. We're going to help working people. And as he said, look, the reality is he came out, he said, I meant what I said when I said I was going to be the most pro-union president in American history. And I make no apologies for it. Music to the ears. This is one of those things where you go, Joe, keep it up. Get out there, tout the horn a little bit, toot the horn a little bit. And what this really sets up is, and this is what I've been talking about for a while. So when people go, hey, do you think Biden's doing a good job? I go, yeah, absolutely. He's moving us away from 40 plus years of supply side voodoo Reaganomics and bad neoliberalism. He's moving us in a direction where working people actually, maybe have a shot. And their government actually gives a tinker's damn about them. So for me, this is that kind of, and maybe it's just being a little wonky, but it's the difference between what we've been struggling and suffering under Reagan forward, and we'd even argue Carter forward, with the all the neoliberalism and the bad trade deals and all this tax fetish stuff, into a time where we're going, look, we're going to support working people. We're going to support people who show up and punch the clock and work hard. They should have an opportunity to get ahead. And as he said in his speech, when we invest in our people, when we strengthen the middle class, we see economic growth that benefits all Americans. That's the American dream. And 40 years of trickle-down limited that dream just to those at the top. And, this is my speech. This is what we've been talking about here. Well, let me check the watch, all 18 years I've been doing this show. Now he points out Bidenomics is working. Things are going in the right direction. He points out that the U.S. has had the highest economic growth among the world-leading economies since the pandemic. He said we've added over 13 million jobs, more jobs in 2 years than any president added in 4 years. And he said that's no accident. And here it is, bang, that's Bidenomics. And it is. I mean, this is one of those things where Biden's approval rating should be through the roof when you look at what's actually gotten done. Now, here's the thing. There was an interesting column over at the New Republic where a guy's asked the question, why isn't Biden more popular? And the reality is, on the left, a lot of people need a lot of things. There's a lot of stuff. There's a list of, I say this to my wife all the time. I've got a honeydew list so long that I got 1,000 things I'm not going to get to today. I'll get to some stuff, not going to get to the rest. And this is what liberals, the left, Democrats have to deal with, because there's a list of 50, 60, 100 things that people want. Education, housing, healthcare, infrastructure, you name it. It's got to be exhausting. But you look at the other side. Republicans, cons. They're really two things. Cut my taxes and punish people I don't like. That's pretty simple. And look, I love the guy over at the New Republic for saying that, because it's true. And this is one of those moments where, Democrats got to get out there and support Joe Biden. This is one of those things where when someone says, well, what's he done? Shall we start? and give the lecture. The fact that we got something coming out of the pandemic to help families get through it, the American Rescue Plan that helped families get through the pandemic, stay on their feet, that was big. The Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, this is big stuff. Fundamentally changing our economy in good ways that I've been calling for years. Now, it's interesting. I got an email recently from John in Santa Fe. And John says, Rick, you asked what policies Republicans have proposed to help working people. And John lists a couple of things. John says Republicans fight for tax cuts to reduce the burden on individuals. He says Republicans fight for deregulation to reduce government regulation and job-killing regulations. Talking points. He said Republicans want to unleash businesses and give them more flexibility. I get that, and I don't disagree. Republicans fight for right-to-work laws to protect workers from greedy unions. This is a Republican thing. They believe somehow passing this no rights at work that comes with no rights and no work benefits them. Not quite sure how John figured this out, but this is what they think. And he says Republicans fight for trade deals. We support free trade agreements that give businesses access to larger consumer bases. And he said these are fundamental to our capitalist system. Maybe if you got on board, you could earn those higher wages you keep demanding. No, none of that stuff leads to higher wages. In fact, we've been doing all of that stuff for 40 plus years because that, my friends, that is Reaganomics. That is what George H.W. Bush coined supply-side voodoo Reaganomics. Even H.W. didn't buy it, sold his soul to be vice president, but even he didn't buy the economic scheme. And what was voodoo Reaganomics? Massive tax cuts. Completely rewrote our tax code to give billionaires and big corporations more. You know, when he took office, the top marginal tax rate in this country was 70%. So if you made like $2 million, that dollar over $2 million was taxed at 70%. He took that all the way down to 28%. And you wonder, gee, how did we get a billionaire class? How did we go from having 3 certified billionaires on the Forbes 400 list to now more than 400? I think we're at like 1,500 now. How do you think that happened? Massive redistribution of the tax code. We gave the wealthy all they wanted. And why? Well, because we believed, we were sold this idea that they were going to use the money in a way that would benefit us. And that by giving it to them, they would use it to build, big factories and all this stuff. And that would then trickle down. And it would come to raining down on us like rivers of gold and honey, and it was going to be magical. It's going to be amazing. And all it did was create massive inequality, the kind of inequality that we hadn't seen since before the Great Depression. They push for more deregulation. And how long have we been hearing about deregulation? We got to cut those job-killing regulations. Well, what about the people-killing lack of regulation? How about you, Texas? When do we get to enough? When does it? Never. That's the thing. Reagan pushed for monetary policy to squeeze inflation down to nothing, and that's great. Okay, inflation doesn't go up, but what does he do simultaneously? He attacks labor unions so that wages don't even keep up with the diminished inflation. And since Reagan forward, we have had deadline and declining wages for working people because of, well, guess what? Trade policies. Because where did NAFTA come from? I know everyone loves to blame Bill Clinton, and I do too. But NAFTA was birthed under Reagan. The idea came out of our, well, out of Bonzo, fully negotiated under H.W. Bush and signed under Clinton. It's a bad idea. It was against it from the beginning. Terrible. But this is what supply-side voodoo Reaganomics got us. So you got massive inequality. You've got workers whose wages are declining and jobs that are leaving the country because, well, we're promoting that now. all the while to pay for massive military spending. And again, we cut taxes incredibly, an enormous amount of tax cuts for the very wealthy, while massively increasing our spending on military. In fact, if those of us who were alive during that period, everyone remembers Star Wars. We were going to have this shield, and it was going to be great. Now, it was never functional. It was more of a scare tactic. We were basically throwing money into a hole to force the Soviets to keep up, which inevitably bankrupted them. But hey, we outspent them. But then what did we do? Massive generational debt and gutting of social programs. Again, kicking the poor, the least among us. And the reality is what happened during that era set the tone for the next 40 years. All of the bad ideas that came out of supply side voodoo Reaganomics, all the bad ideas that came out of neoliberalism, we've been stuck with for decades. So I'm looking at this moment. I'm looking at Bidenomics. There's an opportunity here, folks. There's an opportunity to fundamentally change the next 40 years. Talking about Buy American provisions in government procurement. Saying, look, if we're going to spend money on EVs and we're going to spend money on infrastructure to help the next generation of automobiles, they got to be made here. And they've got to be done with jobs that are sustainable, jobs that are going to support a middle class. And I hate that term middle class, by the way. I believe in a prosperous working class because we all punch a clock. We all have to put food on the table, keep a roof over our heads. We're all trading time for dollars. I want to make sure that workers get the maximum dollar for their time. Just like corporate America wants to make sure that they get the maximum profit out of every moment of your time. And this is where I look at Biden and I look at the policies that they're moving, investing in good infrastructure, investing in things that we need here at home, reshoring manufacturing, and changing some of that. Is it fast enough for me? No, it's never going to be fast enough for me. But again, like I said from the New Republic piece, you've got, on the Democratic side, 100 things that everyone thinks is the most important thing ever. And on the other side, you got 2. Give me tax cuts and hate the same people I hate. So I give Biden credit. I thought the speech was excellent today. I thought the direction was good. I thought the fact that finally he's taking credit for something he's done is great. Now, got to get out there and sell this. Got to go out and start pointing at stuff, like bridges in Philadelphia. And start going out there and pointing at stuff like roads in Dubuque. Got to get out there and start pointing at stuff like, roads in Milwaukee or, bridges in Appleton or whatever is being built. Just point at that and go, I did that. Take credit for it. Because the Orange Menace, if it were him and got half of this stuff done, boy, they'd be carrying him around on golden chariots and feeding him grapes. It's time for Democrats to stand up, speak out, and defend this guy because he's doing a good job. I want to hear your thoughts, though. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So yesterday, Liz Cheney, we used the Liz Cheney quote yesterday that what we've done in our politics is create a situation where we're electing idiots. And I got to tell you, I agree with her. You know, not a Liz Cheney fan, not a Cheney family fan, but you know, she's right. We have been electing idiots. And I saw this speech given by Illinois Governor Pritzker. It was a commencement speech at Northwestern University, and he did a spiel on, you know, how do you spot an idiot? So I'm like, you know, I gotta play this clip of Pritzker. Saying how do you spot an idiot? How do you come up with, how do you find them? And here's Governor Pritzker giving us the what for.
The best way to spot an idiot: look for the person who is cruel. Let me explain. When we see someone who doesn't look like us, or sound like us, or act like us, or love like us, or live like us, the first thought that crosses almost everyone's brain is rooted in either fear or judgment, or both. That's evolution. We survived as a species by being suspicious of things that we aren't familiar with. In order to be kind, we have to shut down that animal instinct and force our brain to travel a different pathway. Empathy and compassion are evolved states of being. They require the mental capacity to step past our most primal urges. This may be a surprising assessment because somewhere along the way in the last few years, our society has come to believe that weaponized cruelty is part of some well-thought-out master plan. Cruelty is seen by some as an adroit cudgel to gain power. Empathy and kindness are considered weak. Many important people look at the vulnerable only as rungs on a ladder to the top. I'm here to tell you that when someone's path through this world is marked with acts of cruelty, they have failed the first test of an advanced society. They never forced their animal brain to evolve past its first instinct. They never forged new mental pathways to overcome their own instinctual fears. And so, their thinking and problem solving will lack the imagination and creativity that the kindest people have in spades. Over my many years in politics and business, I have found one thing to be universally true. The kindest person in the room is often the smartest.
No, and here's the thing, I agree with Governor Pritzker on that entirely. The kindest person is generally the smartest, the most compassionate person, generally the smartest, and most willing to help others. And this is where this weird thing, and I liked his frame of weaponized cruelty, because I've said, you've heard me say before, for a lot of our Republican friends, for the Trumpites, for the MAGA, the red hats, the cruelty is the point. It's all about the cruelty in their policies, in how they treat people, especially when you're talking about the poor, when you're talking about marginalized communities, when you're talking about people who lack the power and the ability to stand up to them. They're bullies. And the cruelty is the point. So I thought what Pritzker had to say was spot on, and something that we've been talking about for a while. The idea of when you look at people who are cruel in their policies, when you look at people who are willing to literally take food out of the mouths of children, these are not people who should be in elected office. These are idiots. And as Liz Cheney said, we've done in our politics, what we've done is we've created a situation where we are electing idiots. Let's go to the phones. Got Alice on line 1. Alice, how are you?
Oh, I'm better than I was. I can talk now.
Good to hear.
I agree with what he said, and I agree with Liz Cheney, too. And, you know, it's very easy for anyone to destroy things and to be cruel and mean. That's the easiest thing to do. It's much harder to build things up and to create things. But we have to remember, the Republican Party seems to have adopted this Ayn Rand thing. And remember, her thing was, you trample on everyone that's weaker than you, and that the winner takes everything. And if we look at that and we trace it back, that actually can go all the way back to that Puritan mindset. And I'm going to say it again out there for everyone listening. The Puritans were not the Pilgrims. They were not the Quakers. They were the ones who came after the Pilgrims and the Quakers, and they soon gained power because that's what they did. And they proceeded to persecute everyone, including the Quakers and the Pilgrims. But, you know, that's the Republican Party. It has become a cult, right along with this evangelical religion. It is a cult.
Yeah.
It's not a political party. It's not a religion. It's a cult. But have a good evening.
Thanks,
Rick.
Alice. Appreciate it. No, I mean, look, as my grandfather always said, any idiot with a hammer can tear down a house. It takes a craftsman to build one. And what you're seeing right before our very eyes is Republican policies, basically just a hammer. Let's destroy everything, especially if it helps someone. If it helps someone in need, we got to destroy it. If it enriches the very wealthy and keeps the powerful happy that fill their campaign coffers, nice. But for working people, the heck with them. And, you know, Alice is right. I mean, you go back to the Reagan 80s. You know, the one who dies with the most toys wins. Greed is good. You know, the heck with my neighbor. It's all about me. And we've been trained to think that way. And so, you know, when John earlier sends me this email, you know, am I surprised it's all of the talking points that we've had for the last 40 years? Am I surprised that it lacks the imagination or the creativity to come up with other wording? No, because this is what we've been spoon-fed for decades, to believe that this is the way it has to be. And it doesn't. And this is where I give Biden credit. We're moving, again, I'm going to tell you straight out, not fast enough for me, but we are moving in that direction to undo 40 years of horrible policy. And I know someone's going, whoa, but you know, Joe Biden was part of that. Yeah. And here's that thing where you go, people can learn. People can come around and go, yeah, this was a mistake. We should probably not do that anymore. Maybe we should pursue the policies, you know, from a different era or new policies to where working people actually have a shot. Because look, the reality is, and this is where, you know, the anger level could be increasing very soon. There's a lot of chaos in the workplace coming very soon. As AI and robotics grabs a hold of job after job and eviscerates them for working people, there's going to be a lot of problems. And we are going to need a strong social safety net to ensure that working people aren't left behind, like has happened in every transition throughout history. But I think we can be smart enough. I think we can be visionary enough to maybe not have it happen this time. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Which side are you on? Bidenomics, Reaganomics? I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1940. That was the day President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the Smith Act. Some initially dubbed it the Harry Bridges Law after the radical labor leader, long targeted by the FBI for deportation. Politicians claimed it was designed to prosecute fascists, Nazis, and communists. In fact, the Smith Act was first used to prosecute and convict Minneapolis Teamster leaders and supporters of the Socialist Workers' Party, recognized for their successful 1934 strike and radical leadership. Named after the Virginia Democratic Representative Howard W. Smith, it was originally titled entitled the Alien Registration Act of 1940. In addition to mandating the registration and fingerprinting of resident aliens, it allowed for the deportation of those resident aliens who sought to overthrow the government by force. But the act also extended to those citizens who advocated the overthrow of the government by force or violence, or engaged in the printing, publishing, or distributing of materials that advocated sedition. And it made it illegal for citizens to organize or belong to any association that engaged in such activity. According to historian Donna Haverty Stack, author of Trotskyists on Trial, Free Speech and Political Persecution Since the Age of FDR, the Smith Act was a peacetime anti-sedition law that marked a dramatic shift in the legal definition of free speech protection in America. The Minneapolis case shows how far the administration went to prosecute political dissent, even to the point of targeting the labor liberal left. The Smith Act served as a prime tool for the McCarthyite Red Scare, and it was used to prosecute more than 100 communists and labor leaders. Finally, in a landmark 1957 Supreme Court case, Yates v. United States, convictions under the Smith Act were rendered unconstitutional.
In Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Humpty Dumpty scornfully declares that when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean. So what does woke mean? It's become the pet political aspersion that today's kooky right-wing hucksters hurl at liberals, but the hurlers would be whopper-jawed to learn that it was actually coined by and for progressives. Indeed, it admonishes people to be awake to the dangers posed by hate-filled bigots and reactionaries like today's right-wing extremists. Surprising historical tidbit: the first person reported to have used the word was Huddie Ledbetter, the legendary black blues artist known as Leadbelly. Among his many classic songs was Scottsboro Boys, about 9 black teenagers falsely accused in 1931 of raping 2 Alabama white women. As a black musician who traveled the back roads of the Jim Crow South, Leadbelly warned others to pay attention when in a viciously racist state. Best stay woke, he cautioned. But out of blind ignorance, blind arrogance, or both, today's adapters of the Jim Crow mentality have perverted common sense wokeness into a verbal whip to lash African Americans, immigrants, Democrats, women, LGBTQ people, and all others they don't like. Pretty much everyone who looks, thinks, prays, and acts different from them. How kooky? They've declared librarians, science, Mickey Mouse, and Bud Light to be their evil enemies. Don't be woke, they bark, demanding autocratic, plutocratic, and theocratic laws to coerce compliance with their own retrogressive bigotries. This is Jim Hightower saying, bear in mind that this is no longer a fringe cult, but the mainstream of the Republican Party, including its top congressional leaders, presidential wannabes, and state officials. Actually, you can easily comprehend what these Humpty Dumptys really mean by their don't be woke war cry. Just substitute the word sane for woke.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
One 416 Rick. 1-866-416-7425. Want to hear your thoughts. Did you see the speech today? Did you see the president take a shot at Tommy Tuberville? I thought that was interesting. The dumbest guy in the Senate, Tuberville, who voted against the infrastructure bill, voted against investments in broadband in Alabama and across the country, and yet happily sending out good tidings and happy wishes to Alabama, going, look at all the money we're going to bring in. Look at all the broadband we're going to have. Yay. I love the fact that the president tweeted out, see you at the groundbreaking. That's Dark Brandon. That is Jelly Bucket Joe at its finest. Hey, we'll see you at the groundbreaking. We're getting the job done. We're doing the work. And, as I keep saying, the fact of the matter is maybe he's not the greatest orator. The speech you could tear apart, and look, the right is going to take every hiccup, every stumble, every stutter. They're going to take it and they're going to make a montage of it, and they're going to be really creative in attacking dark Brandon. But the reality is, fact of the matter, getting stuff done. And I think that's what's really important here. You know, that broadband that they're investing in is going to move us into the 21st century. It's going to make us competitive. It's going to give families, working families, the ability to have the kind of internet that you need in the 21st century. Yeah, I say this all the time. You know, for our little shindig here, our internet bill is almost $400 a month, which across the globe is just outrageous. Completely outrageous, completely out of bounds. But that's where we are. And I've said for a long time, we need to be treating internet access, broadband access, we need to be treating this as a utility like we do with electricity, because it's that important. You cannot survive, thrive, and advance in the 21st century in America without internet access and without good internet access. You know, during the pandemic, we learned this. You know, as people were trying to figure out how to get their kids online to do schooling stuff, and even now after the pandemic is somewhat over, they're still doing online stuff. And I don't know that you should have to sit at the parking lot of the local McDonald's or fast food joint to use the open Wi-Fi. There's something wrong with that. But this is where I come back to. These investments to the average working person, and this is where I say, look, take off the red hat and the blue hat for a minute. Think about the things that we need to be working on and investing in. Think about what it is we need to do as a country to move forward. When Josh Shapiro here in Pennsylvania said, we're going to get this bridge reopened in 2 weeks. We're not going to have, one of the main economic thoroughfares in this country choked for months. We're going to get this done, whatever it takes. And this is a very American idea. This idea that we can do big things, we can accomplish stuff. It's been a while since we've thought like this. It's been a while since we've had a mission. And this is where I want Joe Biden to come out and talk about that in the frame of a mission. Bidenomics is great. The fact that we're changing the economic system in this country to benefit working people and to care about them again is fabulous. And every person who punches a clock and carries a jelly bucket should be on board. Every person who's sweating out the fact that, hey, I hope the kids don't get sick because we might go broke, you should be on the Biden bandwagon. You should be on team builder Biden. But again, you think about where we are. It's all about the division. So when you start talking about, we're going to reshore manufacturing, we're going to bring factories back to towns. Last October, we traveled through numerous states, and we deliberately went to places that used to be. There used to be a factory there. That factory used to be the identity of that town. It used to create the jobs that was the driver for Main Street. And you go into these places, and it's tumbleweeds. It's people struggling just to hold on. Biden's talking about reinvesting in those areas. And they're moving on doing this. Now you go, I've got friends who go, well, you do know that a lot of that investment's going to the South. And look, I got a lot of problems with where it's going and how it's going. But we're reshoring manufacturing. We're creating these jobs. Now, I've had people say, but Rick, they're all going to be automated and all this. Look, if you don't produce, this is the bottom line. If you're not a producer country, you're a dependent country. And if we didn't learn that in the pandemic, I don't know how we educate someone on that. If you looked at during the pandemic and the supply chain troubles that we had, the massive supply chain problems we had, and say we need to fix this, I don't know how to help you. If the red hat is squeezing your head so tight that the blood has stopped flowing and that you don't get that, I don't know how to help you. We have to leave you behind. And that's where the rest of us, the sane, the rational, who want a future for our children, who want a future for our kids and beyond, have to get on board with this. I love the fact that Biden is doing the stuff that he's doing. He's doing some of the things that I've been calling for years. We do need to raise taxes on the ultra wealthy. We do need to deal with our trade problems. We do need to take on China. We do need to take on the kind of corporate greed that's put us in a situation where we're dependent on a communist country. These should be things that unify us. These should be the things that bring us together. At least that's my thought. Now again, I've gotten communications from people going, no, we're fine where we are. We need cheap manufacturing so we can get cheap goods. That mindset that got us into the trouble we're in. So I'm in this spot where I look at what we're spoon-fed. For instance, and this blows my mind. Honestly, this really blows my mind. The big scandal today made it on the F channel, made it all over the right-wing blogosphere. The big scandal. Nobody really nobody on the right talked about the speech. Nobody on the right really talked about the contents of the speech and what Bidenomics is doing to help rebuild a prosperous working class. No. What we went after, what the right decided was the most important issue, was before Biden got on the chopper, evidently must have taken a nap or must have just gotten up or whatever, but had marks on his face. Because evidently Joe Biden uses a CPAP machine. Oh my gosh. Can you believe this? Never mind the fact that we're talking about how we're going to invest some $42 billion on broadband and infrastructure to help businesses and communities. Never mind that. No. It's did you know Joe Biden wears a CPAP? And I don't know why that's a problem. I actually don't know why that is a thing, considering most of the people I know have CPAP machines. Hate them. I hate the whole thing, but this was the scandal. And my mind went to this weird place of, can you imagine? I'm thinking, 1941, thinking the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And I'm imagining today's media. I'm imagining the right-wing outrage candy machine. I'm imagining how they're going to deal with that. And my mind kept going to this place of, never mind the fact that Pearl Harbor got bombed. Never mind any of that. No. It's FDR was standing with metal braces. That's that's where they would go. Because it has to be about division. As I said a moment ago, the Republicans only want a couple of things: tax cuts for rich people and to hate the same people as they do. And to destroy and divide. And so when I saw this story, I'm going, why is this a story? And again, it's to show weakness, and in I guess in their world, getting help medically is, I guess, now a weakness. Because still not sure why it's a story. Still not sure why that hit the news, but it did. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you've got a question, comment, something on your mind, I want to hear it. 1-866-416-RICK. 1-866-416-7425. Right back after that.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1936. That was the day that the U.S. Congress passed the Walsh-Healy Public Contracts Act. The bill had been proposed by the Secretary of Labor, Francis Perkins. The act was part of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal effort to combat the ravages of the Great Depression. The year before, the President and Secretary Perkins had faced a major setback in their New Deal policies. The Supreme Court had declared the National Industrial Recovery Act, part of the recovery plan, unconstitutional. The president and his team went back to the drawing board to develop new strategies. Secretary Perkins told the president, quote, "I've got two bills locked in the lower left-hand drawer of my desk against an emergency." One of those bills became Walsh-Healy. The act declared that any manufacturer with a contract of more than $10,000 with the U.S. government for goods or supplies had to abide by certain rules. They had to pay the prevailing minimum wage. They had to allow their employees to work an 8-hour workday and a 40-hour work week. They could not hire boys under the age of 16 or girls under the age of 18. Companies could not use prison labor, and the companies had to provide a safe and healthy workplace. This New Deal Act stood up under the scrutiny of the courts. Even more importantly, the act was a precursor to the Fair Labor Standards Act. The Fair Labor Standards Act was passed the next year, providing many of these same provisions to the general workforce. The Walsh-Healy Act remains in effect today, protecting workers who are employed by companies that manufacture goods for the U.S. government. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So, Robert sent me an email with an image from Robert Kennedy Jr. And thank you, Robert. I thought it was from Robert Kennedy Jr. himself first, because I saw Robert and I saw RFK, and he sent me this image of a tweet that RFK Jr. put out. And it said, "Join the movement to save our nation. Get the incredible Kennedy collection today and proudly stand with Robert Kennedy Jr. Every purchase fuels his fight for our families and a brighter future. Let's unite America." And you go, yeah, this is your standard campaign. You know, give us money. Here, buy our T-shirt. That kind of stuff. The problem is the image. There is an image that they put of a very attractive young woman, carrying a coffee cup with a white hoodie. It says Kennedy 2024. And when I looked at it at first, it didn't dawn on me. I'm going, okay, why are you sending me this? So a young girl has a sweatshirt on that doesn't look like an actual sweatshirt that has this label on it. Looks like that this was a picture of a woman walking down the thing that they slapped their logo on. Then I started looking a little bit closer. And the background wording is Cyrillic. It's Russian. There are Russian words behind her. And you start looking at this stuff going, that's not a street. It's not a street here. And then, of course, my mind goes to this place of, well, of course. Who else would be funding RFK Jr.? There aren't Democrats who are on his side. And if there are, they're at the kook end of the scale. Now they deleted this. They hurried up and figured out what their error was, and they deleted it. But this is one of those things where you go, yeah, I get campaigns grab images, but I don't know. Shouldn't you fact check a little bit? Shouldn't you look a little bit? Just a little? It is where we are. Some interesting news coming out of some polling. And I generally not a big fan of polling, but this is a fun one. Civics survey out finds that 63% of women disapprove of Ron DeSantis. Not really a good sign. Women don't like Ron DeSantis. I'm sure he's heard that his entire life. Just 27% approve of him. This is not a good for a presidential run. Because look, he is who he is. He's a destroyer, and women know this. So I don't know that he's got much of a chance, because I think Trump is so far ahead at this point Indictments, yeah, that's going to hurt him a little bit. Convictions, maybe. But I think the Republican Party is so far gone that it's not going to matter. And you go, but Rick, you never know. No, I think I know. And it's this next bit that got my attention. Evidently, there's a new book coming out. And it's one of these things where you go, we already knew this, but to have it come back out again, a former Homeland Security, according to Newsweek, a former Homeland Security official in this upcoming book says that Trump talked about his daughter quite a bit. Talked about her breasts, talked about her backside, and what it might be like to have sex with her. This is what this guy's claiming. Remarks that once led John Kelly to remind the president that Ivanka was his daughter. Afterwards, Kelly evidently retold the story, and visible disgust said that Trump is a very, very evil man. And again, this isn't new to anybody who's known Trump. There have been tons of these things. On The View, he was talking about being attracted to his daughter, who I think at the time was like 13. On the Howard Stern show, he said that if she weren't his daughter, he'd be dating her. There's all of these things. Why is this? This shouldn't even be a story. You know when this should have been a story? 2015. This is the kind of stuff that used to tank presidential careers. I think Gary Hart could have been president, got caught with his pants down. Done. This guy gets caught with his pants down numerous times talking about incest. And, who could have known? Who could have known? Who could have known he was so bad? Who could have possibly known that Donald Trump was a liar and all the things that we now know he is? Gee, I wonder. The folks over at ACT TV put together a nice little montage of people who, before Trump was president, actually knew. So I'm going to play this little clip of a number of voices. Maybe you can pick them out. Maybe you can find out who these folks are who think Trump was not qualified to be president.
Has even read the Constitution, knows what's in the Constitution.
A toxic mix of demagoguery and mean-spiritedness and nonsense.
I just cannot support Donald Trump.
Donald Trump is a delusional narcissist and an orange-faced windbag.
Donald Trump is a con artist.
He doesn't know the difference between truth and lies. He lies practically every word that comes out of his mouth.
I think he's a kook. I think he's crazy. I think he's unfit for office.
Yeah, I mean, here's the reality. They all knew. They all knew. But, interestingly enough, did nothing about it. Did nothing. Nothing. In fact, when he kissed his behind, did everything they could. Lindsey Graham, if you may have heard Lindsey Graham's at the end, he's kook. He's kook. Orangest nose of them all. And that's the part that gets me. Glenn Beck knew. You didn't hear a lot out of him. Rick Perry knew. Where did Perry go during the 4 years of the Trump years? Susan Collins. Never. I'm not even getting into Susan Collins. Rand Paul. Orange windbag. Marco Rubio was in there. Ted Cruz, which, when they say a liar knows a liar, Ted Cruz knows. And of course, Lindsey Graham. So if those were your choices in the bingo of horrible, you got them right. But this is the weird part of the story that we're in. Trump's still leading the Republican Party. He's still going to potentially be the nominee. Even with all of this stuff. Even with all of the court cases going on, all of the indictments that are going to come and that are already out there, the faithful have bought into it. And why? As we've said before, there are people who, I look at my family, the basket of deplorables, racist, homophobic, misogynistic, all of those things. All on Team Trump because they believed he was going to do the things that Dark Brandon is actually doing. They believed that he was going to do the things that Joe Biden, that Jelly Bucket Joe is actually doing. They believed he was going to save factories. They believed he was going to invest in infrastructure. They believed he was going to revive a prosperous working class. They believed all of the things that Joe Biden is now doing. And look, Biden took a shot at that. In his speech, said, they talked about infrastructure weeks. I've done an infrastructure decade. That is important. And come election time, and 24 is not that far down the road, Democrats, get your heads out of your behinds. Line up behind Joe Biden. Line up behind the policies, the ideas that are the vision that's going to move us in the right direction. And honestly, do we want 4 more years of chaos? Think about how bad the 4 years under Trump was. And I know, he owned the libs. Yeah, he owned the libs all right. And look where it's got him. All the crimes he's committed, all of the people who were on Team Trump. I look at, the story came out today, Sidney Powell. A federal court of appeals upheld the sanctions against Sidney Powell because she filed numerous baseless and frivolous lawsuits and allegations of massive election fraud. She was one of the people out there doing the work. She was carrying the water, and she's going to be screwed for it. John Eastman, who dreamed up the idea that, hey, we can overthrow democracy. We can throw the Constitution out and just rip up that old piece of paper, and we can decide how elections are decided. We can do that. And here's a new gimmick to do it. And now we find out that Rudy Giuliani has been interviewed by the special prosecutor. And I don't know what Rudy's got to offer. I gotta think America's mayor. I gotta think he's bearing his soul because he's broke, and Trump's never come to anyone's rescue. Certainly not 4 seasons Rudy. So I gotta wonder, what did Rudy bring to the table? Because if I'm Giuliani and I think about all the things that he did as a former federal prosecutor, I'm sure Rudy knows where this is going to lead and what kind of evidence they have. The rat is jumping the ship. And this is one of those moments where, why Trump is so worried is he's got a history of screwing people over. And there are people who are in real trouble. Rudy being one of them. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the leaky Rudy testimony. Because I think there's part of me that goes, it's poetic justice. All the that karma thing. After all of the horrible things that Trump has done, and look, as I've said from the beginning, I was not anti-Trump at the beginning. I didn't want him. I didn't vote for him. Thought he was going to be terrible. Thought he was going to be a criminal. Thought he was going to be the most destructive president in our history. Thought he was going to commit the most crimes of any president in our history. And I was right on all of that. And you didn't need a crystal ball to figure that out. You just had to pay attention to who Trump was. But I wanted him to succeed. I wanted him to do the things that my family believed he was going to do, which is save those factories, bring those factories back, invest in our infrastructure, invest in the future. That's what I wanted. And yet what we get? We got criming. Lots of criming. We got a soap opera, a horrible soap opera, almost unwatchable. And we got a whole bunch of idiotic tweets, misspelled, capitalized, bad grammar. Just makes you wonder. I know I don't want it again. That's why. Get behind Dark Brandon. Quick break. Right back.
Please do what you can to conserve energy. Conservation helps the grid.
Extreme heat and deadly storms spread across much of the U.S.
The rail company says that so far no environmental impact has been detected.
Train carrying hazardous chemicals derails into Montana's Yellowstone River. Plus,
in a lot of spaces now, in many industries, you compete and you partner.
More EV car makers adopt Tesla's fast charging standard.
Trust Elon Musk? Why not? All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley has a new plan to make the U.S. energy independent.
We would stop controlling where they produce or how much they produce and get the EPA out of the way. We would roll back the green subsidies that have been put in place.
Okay, no thanks. This is your Green News Report. All right, Desi Doyen, over in the GOP primary for 2024, they are already competing about who can destroy the environment more.
Yep.
Going to be a fun year. What do you got for us today?
Well, first of all, as we go to air, the persistent, brutal heat wave walloping Texas is entering its third week, and forecasters say it is expanding to other states, affecting 2/3 of Americans, generating deadly storms and tornadoes, widespread power outages, and canceled flights from Arizona to New England.
What happens in Texas doesn't stay in Texas.
No. The Texas electric grid has so far mostly held up in the historic heat, but its biggest failures so far this summer have come from fossil-fueled power plants that overheat and break down. But large-scale batteries are still quietly keeping the lights on during the unplanned outages. Several deaths have been attributed to the heat, including a postal worker and a grid lineman. Late last week, Republican Governor Greg Abbott signed a law effectively prohibiting local ordinances that mandate water and shade breaks for outdoor workers.
How thoughtful.
And yes, this is man-made global warming. Numerous studies show that summers have gotten hotter in the U.S. and are becoming deadlier as climate change drives more extreme weather events. Climate scientist Dr. Michael Mann on CNN explained that worse extreme weather events can be avoided if governments cut emissions quickly.
The planet will continue to warm up and the oceans will continue to get hotter and hotter until we stop putting carbon pollution into the atmosphere. We're getting perilously close to that danger threshold, but we can still avoid crossing it if we can bring our carbon emissions down dramatically within the next 10 years or so.
The most optimistic climatologist on the planet.
In other big news, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against the Navajo Nation in a long-running suit over water from the dwindling Colorado River. In a 5-4 ruling, the right-wing court majority dismissed the tribe's lawsuit, ruling that even though the federal government confined the tribe to a reservation in the Arizona desert in the 1800s, it is not legally required to take any steps to ensure the tribe has an adequate water supply.
How thoughtful.
It's a victory for Western states that said a ruling for the tribe would disrupt existing Colorado River agreements. Justice Neil Gorsuch, who often sides with tribes in legal disputes, joined with the court's liberal justices in dissent. Legal experts say the tribe does have potential options in other water rights litigation. In Montana, cleanup is underway on the Yellowstone River after a railroad bridge collapsed over the weekend, sending multiple rail cars tumbling into the water, where they ruptured and spilled hazardous molten sulfur, asphalt, and sodium hydrogen sulfate into the river. Cause of the accident is under investigation. Officials say so far, air and water testing have not shown any threat to the public, but towns have shut down drinking water intakes downstream of the spill. In Oregon, Multnomah County has filed suit against 17 major oil companies, alleging that pollution from fossil fuels contributed to the historic 2021 heat wave that killed 69 people in the state.
Go get them.
Some good news. Electric vehicle startup Rivian announced it will join GM and Ford in adopting Tesla's North American charging standard, which will give its car owners access to Tesla's expansive fast-charging network in the U.S. and Canada. The move puts Tesla on its way to making its standard dominant as EV adoption grows. Prospective buyers get reassurance that charging will be available, and Tesla gets the charging revenue and the ability to access federal infrastructure financing. Finally, great news. The Financial Times reports that for the first time in history, global spending on solar energy production will outpace spending on oil production this year. $370 billion investment in oil, $380 billion investment in solar, with China investing more than the rest of the world combined in solar manufacturing.
Well, most of that is good news. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So this is a really interesting story. Yellow Freight Corporation. They are one of the last of the National Master Freight Agreement, LTL, freight companies in the country. They have filed a $137 million lawsuit against the International Brotherhood of Teamsters because the Teamsters won't give them everything they want. They won't rip up the contract and go into fire mode to allow the company to save itself from all of the bad decisions that it's made over the last 50 years. Now, little personal insight, as someone who has spent 30 years in the LTL industry, Yellow is one of those companies that everything they touched, they destroyed. Think Carolina, think Roadway Express, think a bunch of things that they have absorbed and destroyed. And it's not surprising they're in the mess that they're in. Also, given the fact that Donald Trump gave them $700 million and they figured out how to squander that as well. Now it's, hey, workers, we want more. And the union and Sean O'Brien, the president of the Teamsters, said, not going to do it. And here to share some thoughts on this creative tactic of, we're just going to sue you for $1 gazillion. I've asked Eric Fink to come talk with us. Eric is a associate professor of law at the Elon Law School. Eric, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, always a pleasure, Rick.
So, I'm looking at this, and, the only word I can come up with is creative. This is a creative way to evade collective bargaining. This is a creative way to get away from sitting down and negotiating. This is a way of saying, hey, we're going to use the Supreme Court or the court system to beat you over the head, and we don't care about your workers or you.
Yeah, I can think of other words than creative, but they're probably not suitable for a family radio program. So we'll stick with creative.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of irony in this lawsuit. Because, of course, what the company is accusing the Teamsters of is refusing to negotiate, okay? And, I took the time this afternoon to read the complaint. There's a lot of detail in it, which is to say the company takes a whole lot of swipes at the Teamsters, both specific swipes at how the Teamsters have responded to the company's attempt to restructure and its impact on jobs. And more broadly, they seem to have a lot of fun mocking Teamsters president Sean O'Brien. And there's a lot of stuff in here about what he puts on his Twitter feed. They seem real, again, I'll try to keep my language clean. They seem very sad that he has mocked the company and its bad business decisions publicly on Twitter. And, those of us in the labor movement or supportive of the labor movement who follow this stuff have already seen that Sean O'Brien is what we call a poster. He is a master of Twitter, and so he's made Yellow Freight sad, I guess. And so they have decided that because their bad business decisions and their inability to get the Teamsters to agree to their plan, because that's led to a decline in the company's share price or its ratings by the corporate review world, that this is somehow the Teamsters' fault, and they think that they get to sue the Teamsters for not just $137 million. That's the starting point. They claim that they've already lost 137 million. It's not clear where they get that number from. And then they say in the lawsuit that they might potentially lose a whole lot more, that it will be the Teamsters' fault if the company folds. And they also want attorney's fees and punitive damages, I guess, to, terrorize any labor union that has the temerity, right? The audacity not to just do what the boss says. And you're right. This is going back. When I teach labor law, I start, and the students wonder why, I start in the 1800s. And one of the things I look at is bosses, companies using the courts to basically declare unions' negotiating efforts to be against the law. Okay, they used to call it criminal syndicalism or criminal conspiracy. Here they're calling it breach of contract, but this is not really a breach of contract suit. They call it a breach of contract suit for legal reasons, but it's really a boo-hoo, you've been mean to me lawsuit.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's amazing that they're doing this. But again, this is the kind of moment that we're in, Eric. I mean, you look at the Supreme Court just came down with a case and a decision that, 20 years ago would have been unthinkable to bring into a courtroom. But, the Teamster, the cement case out in Seattle has gone the way of the companies.
Yeah, and this is a little bit different, without getting too much into the stuff I would teach in law school. That case involved a strike, and so the issue there was when the strike started, the workers walked off their jobs. Well, that's kind of how a strike worked. And so the company says because they left their cement mixer trucks, that this caused property damage. And so historically, I know you know this, Rick, your listeners might not know, there's an old case called Garmin, where the Supreme Court decades ago said, look, Congress passed the Labor Act in the 30s. This was supposed to govern labor relations. And this was, among other things, supposed to guarantee labor peace by requiring bargaining and creating a whole procedure and structure with the National Labor Relations Board and Unfair Labor Practices. And so the Supreme Court in Garmin says, that's the law that governs. If you've got a beef with a union, you go through that procedure. You're not allowed to bring a state law tort suit, like you would for a traffic accident or medical malpractice, and sue the union for that. Because, if what the union is doing, if the basis of your suit is conduct by the union, that is at least arguably protected under the Labor Act. Now, strikes are protected under the Labor Act, so that was the union's position. The Supreme Court said that there is an exception, and there was some recognition that claims for actual property damage, like, if strikers trespass and they set fire to the factory or something, those suits have been allowed.
Sure.
The Supreme Court did not say necessarily that the company wins in that cement case, but they said they are allowed to sue in state court. All right. This case is different because at the very least, I have to credit, right, because I'm a law teacher, I got to, maybe reluctantly or half reluctantly, credit the company's lawyers for at least following the letter of the law. The Labor Act does allow either a company or a union or an employee to bring a lawsuit in federal court for breach of a collective bargaining agreement. That would normally be a breach of contract suit in state court, like if you sued, a store for not selling you what they promised. But a breach of a collective bargaining agreement, that's a special federal lawsuit, and that goes to federal court. So that's what Yellow Freight says they're doing here. They frame this by saying that we've got a contract with the Teamsters, the master freight agreement, right? Yellow Freight, the background to this is Yellow Freight wants to restructure. They want to reorganize. They're losing money. Their business is, like you say, they're not very good at what they do. And so they say, we've got to restructure to stay competitive. So they want to combine, they've got these subsidiaries. They want to combine these subsidiaries and combine some of the terminals and combine some of the operations, okay? And they say, we have a right to do that. That's a management decision. And yes, that's true, okay? They have, under the law, if they want to merge their operations, they have to bargain with the union over how that affects employees. And the big way that affects are things having to do with seniority. Because as you know, anytime there's a company merger, part of that is to downsize the workforce. Company is open about this. They're not pretending that's not the case here. Under the contracts, those layoffs usually are go in order of seniority, and people with seniority usually have rights to bid on whatever jobs remain and so on. So under the contract, the company admits we have to bargain with the Teamsters at least over how to work out all these seniority issues. Okay, fine. The contract has this process for basically a joint labor management committee to work that out. So what the contract says is the company says, here's our reorganization plan, okay? And we want the committee to come up with how, a way to deal with all the seniority issues, the impact on the employees. The company claims that the Teamsters have not engaged in that process in good faith. And they say that the Teamsters have taken advantage of this and the company's desperate need, to accomplish this restructuring to, according to the company, hold the company over the barrel to get wage concessions and other stuff. And the company claims that President O'Brien is using this as an opportunity to show, to flex his muscles and show how strong he is. Okay. And they say that as if that's not okay, like as if that's not what unions are supposed to do. Unions are supposed to protect their workers' interests.
And no,
so,
you
I'm reading this and thinking, which part of this, is it that they say is improper? But the bottom line, right, to bring it to a close, so you can ask another question. Their claim is that the Teamsters have not participated in this committee process, have refused to do that, have refused to meet, and that that this is a breach of the contract, and so they're entitled to sue. So one of the things that's interesting is, again, Rick, as you know, a lot of your listeners probably know, almost every union contract has a grievance and arbitration procedure. The Supreme Court has repeatedly said, whether in union contract or consumer contract, if the contract says you have to arbitrate your contract disputes, you don't get to bring a lawsuit in federal court or state court or any court. You got to go through the grievance and arbitration procedure.
Right.
In their complaint, Yellow tries to get around that. I don't find it very convincing, but we'll see what the court says. They claim that they're not required to bring this through the grievance process because we're demanding $137 million in economic damages, and we couldn't get that from the grievance procedure. Now, the usual answer to that, if it was an employee trying to sue for breach of contract, would be, yeah, too bad, because that's what the contract says. That's what you bargained for, right? So I'm sorry that you would rather get some other remedy, but that's not what you got. That's not what you're entitled to.
So in looking at this, Eric,
the first question that I have is, what's the court going to do about that? I don't know. I haven't spoken to anyone from the Teamsters. I haven't seen their response, but I'm guessing that will be part of their answer, is that the court should throw this out, first of all, at least until the company exhausts the grievance procedure. And then you get to the supposed merits of the lawsuit, which is, did the union really, even assuming that the union did all these things that the company claims they did, does that really breach the contract? And can they really show that this, can they really attribute $137+ million worth of losses? Is that really the union's fault?
Yeah, when I saw this first, and look, you're the legal expert here. When I first saw it, I just saw this as a bargaining ploy, saying, it's like an employer kind of strike, if you will. Workers go out on strike and withhold their labor. This is them going, we're going to sue you for everything you've got, and force them back to the table, because as I understand it, as people have told me secretly, there are negotiations going on. It's just that the union's not going to give the company what they want, which is basically eviscerating all of the work rules. Look, if you're struggling because you've got a bad business model and you've run yourself into the ground, and you're not going to save yourself by abusing your workers. That seems like a sane, rational position to stand on.
Yeah. No, and I read it, even again, just reading the company's own version in the complaint that they filed, that's what it looked like to me, that their real complaint is that the union is engaging in hard bargaining, and that the union are doing a good job of it, right? And that the union are not giving the company exactly what it wants. And they're really upset that President O'Brien is open about this and not being coy about it.
Yeah, and their feelings are hurt. So
and
last
as
question.
I said, it's ironic when you consider that that's the stuff that companies normally do. Of course, when unions try to negotiate, the companies, all right, I'll go there, right? Shit, stall, and delay, right? That's what happens all the time. And the company says, yeah, well, man, what are you going to do about it? And there's usually not much. The union can go to the labor board, and how long does that take? And where does that usually get you? So it's really pretty cheeky to see a company turn around and accuse the union at worst of doing what companies do all the time, but saying, oh, well, we're entitled to $137 million plus punitive damage.
So last question I've got for you, because, look, I look at our court system, especially our Supreme Court, seems to be heavily weighted toward corporate interests. It seems to be that they're in the pocket of the Chamber of Commerce, that, again, these kind of suits 20 years ago would have never been filed or even reported on. But we're in a different era right now, Eric, and you know this as well as anyone. So do you think this gains any ground if this gets in front of a Trump appointee? Do you think this gets to the Supreme Court? Do you think this makes it that far, or does this get cut off at the knees?
No, that's the real concern, right? Because if this was 10, 20 years ago, I don't think that this would go anywhere. I don't think that a sensible company lawyer would have even advised proceeding with this lawsuit. But nowadays, all bets are off. Even if it goes to an honest judge at the initial level. I don't know who the judge will be. They filed this, I think, in Kansas. I don't know who any of the judges are in Kansas. But, what they're counting on is that then they'll appeal to the appellate courts, which are heavily stacked with, right-wing judges, and ultimately to the Supreme Court, which is, of course, dominated by right-wing anti-union judges and has shown that it is willing to let employers sue unions for doing what unions exist to do legally under the law. And that's what's scary. It's easy for me as a law professor to say, this looks like nonsense. This looks unmeritorious under the precedent. But I don't know how much that precedent really matters anymore. Yeah. So I wouldn't bet on this disappearing very easily, which worries me.
Yeah, I mean, this opens up a whole new...
If it goes far, even if they don't ultimately win, if they can survive a motion to dismiss, if they can drag this out in court, other employers are going to try this. And they don't really care about winning. They don't really think they're going to get $137 million, or at least that's not the point. The point is they think they're going to bankrupt the union, or at least exhaust the union and deplete its support in the meantime.
And ultimately, that's what the entire right-wing agenda has been about over the last 40 years, with these no rights at work laws and all of these decisions that have given these companies the ability to sue. It's incredible. So this could be the next avenue. It will be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
But Eric, I appreciate you taking some time sharing your expertise. I will definitely have you back as this continues, because I think this is important.
All right. Well, Rick, always a pleasure, and thanks for everything you do to keep the labor story in the public eye.
Thanks so much, Eric. Appreciate the time. Eric Fink, Associate Professor of Law at Elon Law School. Want to hear your thoughts. Is this a big deal? Do you think this could be something? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Well, certainly going to be an interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with this lawsuit. Yellow Freight, suing the Teamsters for $137 million. Now, understand, Yellow Freight. I've never been a fan, to be honest. They back in, I think it was like 2004. They ended up in basically a hostile takeover, buying a Broadway Express, which had been a $6 billion company. They were the leader of the LTL industry. They were the big company. Yellow was number 2. They were about a $6 billion company. And somehow Yellow figured out how to turn 2 $6 billion companies into one $6 billion company. And now you see that all of the debt they took on, all of the bad decisions they made over the years, the enormous number of changes of operations that cost millions of dollars over the years have now come home to roost. And the union's saying, look, show us a plan that's going to help you save yourself, but not screw our employees, screw our members. What they want is they want to throw out the entire contract, and they want to work people like dogs. And the union's saying, no, we want to make sure that we get, if we're going to save this company, we've got to benefit from it too. Look, Yellow employees, YRC employees, Roadway employees, all of them all along the line have given massive wage concessions for years now. I mean, this is years they've given massive givebacks, have frozen their pensions, have cut their health care contributions time and time again. The Teamsters Union is the only reason Yellow is still in business. And there's a point at which the union's going, look, you got to figure out how to do this, but we're not giving up all of the work rules, and you're not going to be able to stick it to our members. Also, speaking of not sticking it to the members, looks like a strike at UPS is imminent as the Teamsters today walked away from the bargaining table because, well, UPS didn't come with anything. The union, I guess, is now saying, give us your last, best, and final, and we will figure it out. If this is the best you got, then a strike is imminent, and this is where it's going to go. And I looked at the numbers. I don't know how you can not strike, given the fact that this is one of the most profitable companies in the country, $13.9 billion in profit, and they're demanding a cost-neutral contract. Get out of Dodge. There's no way that can be accepted. Just not. I do want to address one thing. We had a caller in a little bit ago, didn't want to come on air. On the Trump-Hillary thing, I guess we're going to have to revisit that for a second. He claims that, and he's actually right, that Trump came out against the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement. And Hillary was not out against it. Hillary was, I think she was for it, and I agree that was problematic. Now, she had some ideas on, trade enforcement and a whole bunch of things to try and pull this in. What Democrats never did, and what Obama never did, and I said during the whole TPP fight, how you should have sold it was, this is our way of taking on China. This is our way of ensuring that we organize all of the countries around them so that we can hold them in check. That never happened. And look, I'm not a free trader, and I get it. A lot of people looked to Trump, who was not a free trader, who said he was against the TPP, and a lot of people voted in that way. Hillary did not run on the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement, and it was basically dead. But to be honest, that could have affected some people's votes. I fully aware of that, and I think this is where I come back to Biden. I come back to Jelly Bucket Joe. We're not talking about those kind of things. I think we've kind of learned our lessons. I think Democrats have finally figured out, and we've kind of purged some of the DLC folk, gotten rid of some of the neoliberals, That's a good start. And this is where, again, working class voices, working class representatives, people who know what it's like to lace up a pair of boots and put on a pair of gloves and do an honest day's work. Those are the people you want in the halls of Congress, not some of these kooks that we see today. Thanks so much for your thoughts. Email me, Rick at ricksmithshow.com. Back after this.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1936. That was the day that the U.S. Congress passed the Walsh-Healy Public Contracts Act. The bill had been proposed by the Secretary of Labor, Francis Perkins. The act was part of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal effort to combat the ravages of the Great Depression. The year before, the President and Secretary Perkins had faced a major setback in their New Deal policies. The Supreme Court had declared the National Industrial Recovery Act, part of the Recovery Plan, unconstitutional. The President and his team went back to the drawing board to develop new strategies. Secretary Perkins told the president, quote, "I've got 2 bills locked in the lower left-hand drawer of my desk against an emergency." One of those bills became Walsh-Healy. The act declared that any manufacturer with a contract of more than $10,000 with the U.S. government for goods or supplies had to abide by certain rules. They had to pay the prevailing minimum wage. They had to allow their employees to work an 8-hour workday and a 40-hour work week. They could not hire boys under the age of 16 or girls under the age of 18. Companies could not use prison labor, and the companies had to provide a safe and healthy workplace. This New Deal Act stood up under the scrutiny of the courts. Even more importantly, the act was a precursor to the Fair Labor Standards Act. The Fair Labor Standards Act was passed the next year, providing many of these same provisions to the general workforce. The Walsh-Healy Act remains in effect today, protecting workers who are employed by companies that manufacture goods for the U.S. government. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
In Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Humpty Dumpty scornfully declares that when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean. So what does woke mean? It's become the pet political aspersion that today's kooky right-wing hucksters hurl at liberals, but the hurlers would be whopper-jawed to learn that it was actually coined by and for progressives. Indeed, it admonishes people to be awake to the dangers posed by hate-filled bigots and reactionaries like today's right-wing extremists. Surprising historical tidbit. The first person reported to have used the word was Huddie Ledbetter, the legendary black blues artist known as Leadbelly. Among his many classic songs was Scottsboro Boys, about 9 black teenagers falsely accused in 1931 of raping 2 Alabama white women. As a black musician who traveled the back roads of the Jim Crow South, Leadbelly warned others to pay attention when in a viciously racist state. Best stay woke, he cautioned. But out of blind ignorance, blind arrogance, or both, today's adapters of the Jim Crow mentality have perverted common sense wokeness into a verbal whip to lash African Americans, immigrants, Democrats, women, LGBTQ people, and all others they don't like. Pretty much everyone who looks, thinks, prays, and acts different from them. How kooky? They've declared librarians, science, Mickey Mouse, and Bud Light to be their evil enemies. Don't be woke, they bark, demanding autocratic, plutocratic, and theocratic laws to coerce compliance with their own retrogressive bigotries. This is Jim Hightower saying, bear in mind that this is no longer a fringe cult, but the mainstream of the Republican Party, including its top congressional leaders, presidential wannabes, and state officials. Actually, you can easily comprehend what these Humpty Dumptys really mean by their don't be woke war cry. Just substitute the word sane for woke.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Some real interesting things happening around education in my state of Pennsylvania. First, the state Supreme Court has come down with a ruling on funding, and now we've got the Democratic governor coming out in favor of vouchers. And I'm going, kind of hope that wasn't going to be something. I mean, I was hoping hoping we weren't going to follow the Iowa model, hoping we weren't going to go down the, child labor laws next. But here to share some thoughts on the decision and what's going on with the governor, I've asked Chris Lilienthal to come talk with us. Chris is the Assistant Director of Communications at PSEA, the Pennsylvania State Education Association. Chris, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Rick.
So walk me through. Let's start with the Supreme Court decision, because I'm not sure this got a lot of attention. Where are we? What is it? What's it going to do, and why?
Sure. So, this is a case that has been years in the making, and there was a very lengthy trial, a ton of expert testimony, evidence introduced that made the case for the fact that Pennsylvania's public schools are inequitably funded. And what that means in a nutshell is that not all schools are getting the same amount of resources to give every student in every zip code that same opportunity. And so when the court ruled back in February initially, they ruled that our public school funding system was so broken that it violates Pennsylvania's state constitution. And I want to emphasize, this is a case all about how our public schools are funded. So fast forward now to the last week of June. We are finally at that point where all the parties are coming together in Harrisburg to negotiate a state budget. And as usual, education funding is a huge piece of that and a huge point of discussion. And that's where we are right now. And so up to this point, we've been advocating very strongly to focus on what the court told us to focus on, and that is fixing Pennsylvania's broken school funding system for our public schools.
It's interesting. I've had conversations with people who have said that, their thought is that the belief structure is that all kids in the state get, the same kind of resources. It's almost like they're pushing this idea there's a backpack full of cash that each kid gets, and it's all the same across because the state doles it out. And the reality is in Pennsylvania, we've got 500 school districts, over 67 counties, and they all have different funding levels because they've all got different, property tax levels because of how we fund our education system. So I think there's a lot of education that has to be on that side of it, that it really is unfair because what you get is a lot has to do with what your zip code is.
That's absolutely right. And it's wrong. It's wrong. And the problem is that Pennsylvania as a state needs to be kicking in more state funding to equalize the fact that, some communities are going to have a wealthier tax base than others. And some communities are going to have robust commercial businesses that are going to be providing that tax base. And some places are going to be more residential. Some are inner city, some are very rural, some are suburban. It's just, Pennsylvania is a huge state. It is so diverse, just in terms of the size and shape of communities, as well as ethnically and racially diverse. And so Pennsylvania as a state has a responsibility to be funding our schools in a way that makes sure that every kid gets a fair shake, gets the same opportunity, regardless of his or her zip code or where they happen to grow up. And that's what this case is all about.
Right. I mean, it seems to me, look, I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland, and it was always curious to me that, the schools in our neighborhood never got the same kind of resources that the suburbs got, and there was no mechanism to help make sure that happens. And when you look in some of these high poverty areas, like where I grew up, you would think you would need more resources to help people catch up. If truly education is that great equalizer, that you would need more resources into high poverty areas than you might in other areas, because there are a lot more problems in high poverty communities than you have in the wealthier areas, or at least that's my thought. I'm curious yours.
No, that's an excellent point, Rick, because when you talk about high poverty communities, you might be talking about students who don't have access to meals. They might be hungry. They're coming to school without proper nutrition. They could be homeless. They could be home insecure. Moving from one house to the next. All of that is going to have a tremendous impact on a student's ability to learn. So you're absolutely right. We need to be looking at making sure that the resources are there for the academic instruction, so that they have great teachers, they have great support staff, but also so that there's funding there for meals, there's funding there for support. Community schools is an idea that's gotten a lot of attention in the last couple of years. Erie County, the Erie School District in particular, has been doing a really amazing job developing some community school models within their elementary and high school. That's the direction we need to be going. But of course, all of that takes, you guessed it, more state funding.
Yeah, takes resources. No, look, I go back to when I was a kid, Chris. You know, in the summertime, the local Puritas Elementary School, the local elementary school during the summertime, you could line up around 11 in the morning and you'd get a hot lunch. And for a lot of the kids, and it wasn't much, like grilled cheese sandwiches, beans and wieners, something like that. But for a lot of those kids in that line, that was the only hot meal they would get all day, because that was the kind of area that we were in. And I remember, when Reagan came in, Mr. Ketchup is a vegetable, and eviscerated all of those programs. And, the reality is those kids went hungry.
You're right. Yeah. I mean, we cannot think that, on what planet are you able to go about your life and work through, whether it's school, whether it's a job, on an empty stomach? You need to have nutrition. It's just basic to being a functioning human.
You got to pull yourself up your bootstraps,
in particular.
Chris. Bootstraps. Yeah. Pull yourself up.
Yeah. Well, you know what? If you want kids to be able to pull themselves up to the desk and actually sit down and get their work done, they need to have a healthy breakfast. They need to have a healthy lunch.
Yeah, and the stability of what school offers. And again, I go back to my experience in a housing project and the kind of problems that, this is back in the 70s. I mean, it's much worse today than it was back then with all of the other social problems we have. It just seems like the Hunger Games that we're playing with education is not getting us where we need to be. And the sad reality is what's happening is we're pitting wealthier communities against poorer communities instead of saying, hey, how can we be one community, ensure that we have an educated populace to be good citizens and good workers and all that stuff too, but good citizens.
Yeah, I think that's when you go back and you look at this court case that, actually started about a decade ago, the process started. The trial lasted for several months. If you tuned into any of those expert witnesses and the families who were testifying and the school officials and the teachers, the story that was told is a lot what you're talking about here, Rick. The fact that there are too many districts in this Commonwealth where students don't have what they need to be, to learn, to be safe, to be in a healthy and a safe environment. And we need to do a better job. And that was the direction that the judge gave us. Do better. Come up with a remedy for this.
No, absolutely. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're with Chris Lilienthal. He's the Assistant Director of Communications at PSEA, the Pennsylvania State Education Association. You can check out their website, psea.org. We'll get links out on social media. Now, this brings us to the Willy Wonka Hunger Games of education, because I guess the golden ticket is back, I guess. Is this what I'm hearing? And we've got a Democratic governor in Josh Shapiro, who I think has been doing a very good job. I'm questioning this, but I guess the golden tickets are back.
Yeah, you're talking about vouchers here. It's the late stages of the budget negotiations. When this process started, when the governor introduced his proposed budget in March, it was all about getting us on track to be making those investments in our schools to address learning needs, to address mental health, to address building safety and meals. And now all of a sudden the conversation has been derailed and we're talking about vouchers. We're talking about allocating up to $100 million in state taxpayer dollars that would be taken away from our public schools to give to private and religious schools, the golden ticket, as you like to say. This is something that the Senate Republicans have been advocating for, and Governor Shapiro has said that he's open to this idea. All eyes right now are on the House of Representatives, a one-seat majority there held by House Democrats. And,
Right.
So far they have shown no interest whatsoever in this proposal. They put forth a budget just a few weeks ago that actually stepped up what Governor Shapiro called for our public schools. They included some Level Up funding. Level Up is a great program that went into effect during the Wolf administration that directs an additional amount of money to the 100 poorest school districts in the state to kind of get them closer to that equity place where we want them to be.
Right.
So we have some really good people in Harrisburg working for the right things, but we also have some deep pockets, some very well-heeled groups funded by right-wing billionaires who are looking to push this idea of vouchers.
But again, this voucher idea, and I go back to this, the golden ticket, as I call it, because I remember when it first came out, we had State Senator Mike Fulmer on the program who was, the big champion of this. He proposed a piece of legislation that he didn't read or write, but he told me flat out, he said, and I asked him, I said, look, if I get one of these golden tickets, and I can go anywhere. I have this thing that every parent wants, the best education their kids can get. Can I take them anywhere? And he's like, absolutely. So if I'm going to take them to, let's say, Philadelphia to, Abington Friends School, which is about $50,000 a year for kindergarten, will it cover this? And he told me flat out, yes, you're going to be able to take this golden ticket, this wonderful voucher, this amazing thing, and you're going to be able to get your kid that $50,000 a year private education. And I said, I think you didn't read your bill, because that's not what these are, is it?
No, not at all. We're talking about $5,000 grants, $10,000 grants. But, really, the bigger issue here is, what are you getting for that? You're getting this voucher for students to go into a private school setting. There is absolutely no student academic accountability once they head over to this private school. So once we hand out these vouchers, once we've given them thousands of dollars in taxpayer money, we have no idea whether that student is doing better, doing worse, whether that student is experiencing any additional issues, whether it be mental health or otherwise, because there is absolutely no accountability for how this money is handled. Right. once it leaves the Harrisburg. So, we're looking at all this and we're saying, wait, okay, so there's a ton of accountability metrics in place for our public schools, but we're going to hand out these taxpayer dollars and have no idea if they're actually helping students.
Yeah, but here's the thing.
It's a huge concern.
No, it is. It's a huge concern where this money goes, and the accountability and transparency and all this, and who gets them as well. I mean, the reality is what we've seen in other places, and you're the expert on this, but what I've seen in other places is these voucher schemes, the money seems to just go to people who are already sending their kids to private schools or religious schools. It just seemed to be a windfall. It didn't actually help the people that were told it's supposed to be helping. In fact, what I'm understanding on this, and you can help me with these Lifeline scholarships that they're calling them, we're talking about the worst performing schools, kids who are in the worst performing areas getting this golden ticket and going where? I mean, this is my other problem. In these areas, what other options are there that you're going to get for a couple of $1,000s? Again, parents in these areas don't have the money to put food on the table most of the time. How are they going to afford a private school education?
Right. We talk about school choice and parent choice, but really this is about the private school's choice. They get to choose who they accept and who they don't accept. And you're absolutely right, Rick. There's no income limitations whatsoever in this Lifeline scholarships bill. So a very wealthy Pennsylvanian who is already, sending kids to a private school setting can tap into this. And we have no sense of, what happens with that student. We have no accountability on how those funds are spent.
Is there any way in your mind, because I've had people say, well, if the money's not coming out of the public school, why does it matter? Is there any world where that happens, where the money that they're going to spend on these pet projects, vouchers, charter schools, whatever, is there any world where that doesn't harm public education?
No, not at all. I mean, it is absolutely impossible to structure a private school voucher program that doesn't come at the expense of our public schools, because it's not as if we have some magic source of money. It all comes from one place. It comes from you and me and the rest of taxpayers of Pennsylvania, Rick. And so we have a budget, and it's about priorities. It's about what is important to us, and we cannot leave our public schools in a state where the system is broken, where they need these resources to meet the basic needs of their students. We cannot leave them in the lurch and direct hundreds of thousands or hundreds of millions of dollars in state taxpayer dollars to private and religious schools with no accountability whatsoever.
No, I'm with you. Last line of questioning I've got for you, because Pennsylvania is on the on the target board of states to go after in education. In fact, Maniacs for Misery, the Moms for Liberty group, they're having their big powwow, I guess, this weekend in Philadelphia, here in Pennsylvania, because this is ground zero for the attack on public education. I'm curious your thoughts of of this group and the kind of organizing they are doing. Because look, I love people who have energy. I just wish they'd use it in a positive direction.
Yeah, one of the things that is troubling about some of the messaging, some of the rhetoric that you hear from Moms for Liberty is the suggestion that parents and teachers are clashing with each other. The truth is, I talk to members all across the Commonwealth. Our teachers and our support professionals, they work hand in hand with the parents in their communities. They want to have those conversations with their students' parents, because they know that when you have engaged parents and when you have engaged teachers working together, that's what's going to get our students to where they need to be, to get them on the road to success. Unfortunately, Moms for Liberty has taken this very adversarial relationship. They think that teachers and parents are enemies, and that's simply not the case.
No, I think they want to create that environment. I think this, I know that we've got a billionaire in this state who's funding this stuff heavily with the goal of destroying teachers' unions and public education and all this, so that, Education Incorporated money can line their pockets. But I'm with you. I don't see that same kind of tension. I see people trying to cause it, but I'm not seeing it on the ground. Chris, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the work you guys do, and thanks so much for the update.
Thank you, Rick.
I want to hear your thoughts. Any thoughts on the vouchers? Have you seen a place where this works? I want to hear it. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. President Grover Cleveland had a growing problem. The nation was in the midst of a deep depression. Unrest amongst working people was mounting. The workers at the Chicago Pullman Palace car factory had declared a boycott against the company. They were angry that their wages had been drastically slashed, while the rents in Pullman's company town had stayed the same. The boycott of Pullman cars threatened to snarl railroads throughout the nation. And on this day in labor history, the year was 1894. President Grover Cleveland signed the law that declared Labor Day a national holiday. He hoped setting a day aside in recognition of labor would help appease frustrated workers. The bill had been rushed through Congress. It passed both the House and Senate unanimously. But the idea for Labor Day did not start with D.C. politicians. Working people themselves conceived the idea of the holiday. Two men with very similar sounding last names are both credited with coming up with the idea of a Labor Day. The first was Matthew McGuire. He was a machinist and secretary of the New York Central Labor Union. His birthday was also today in labor history. That year was 1850. The second person credited with calling for a Labor Day was Peter McGuire, a carpenter. The very first Labor Day celebration took place in New York City on Tuesday, September 5th, 1882. The goal was to demonstrate the strength and the spirit de corps of the trade and labor organizations. 5 years later, Oregon became the first state to officially declare a Labor Day holiday. More than 24 other states had founded similar holidays by the time the National Labor Day was declared. For more than a century, Labor Day has been set aside to remember those who fought for a better life for themselves and their children, and to remember the struggles and celebrate worker solidarity.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Got an email from George. Rick, thanks for talking about the Yellow Freight lawsuit. Yellow has always been bad for the industry. You may remember that they were the first to give discounts after deregulation. They took over and destroyed Roadway Express in Carolina, as you said. They have always been a poorly run company. They have always been bad for workers. Even people who work for them have complained about how bad they are. Look, I worked for a very short period of time. And it was right at the end when Roadway Express was absorbed by them. And it was one of those situations where, originally Roadway had thought about buying Yellow because they wanted to consolidate, the LTL market. They wanted to be the behemoth. But when Roadway looked at it, the numbers, the math didn't add up. They didn't see a way forward, and the executives at the time at Roadway, of which they weren't horrible. In fact, those executives had gone through a spin-off and saved Roadway Express because they were set to go off to die. Years before, you had a situation where Roadway Services had RPS, they had Viking, Kohl's, Spartan, they had all these other non-union entities, and they took the union entity and spun it off to die, figuring that all the non-union companies would thrive. Well, all of them went out of business because they were poorly run and had high turnover and all the stuff. I remember Roadway Express used to say, look, our power is in the dedication of our employees, the longevity of our employees. They used to brag about the fact that they had a less than 2% turnover rate, which in the trucking industry is amazing. The fact that you have people who are skilled, qualified, and dedicated to your company because they make good wages. They have good benefits. They have a future there. And the company was proud of that, and they used that. When Yellow took over, it was all about a fire sale. They got themselves into deep debt. They ended up selling off all of the properties that they had, for peanuts. Basically, it'd be like me buying your house and selling your furniture to pay the mortgage, and then when the furniture's all sold, it's taking the aluminum siding off the side of the house and selling that for scrap metal. That's basically what Yellow did, and they've been run poorly. They took a company that were the number 1 and number 2 carriers in the country, and they destroyed it. And look, people were brand specific, and I remember when they tried to combine the companies. People didn't want Yellow in their facility, and people didn't want Roadway in their facility. And when you showed up with a tractor that said Roadway and a trailer that said Yellow, you were making everybody mad. And they lost nearly half their accounts. So am I surprised that they're in trouble? No. They're a poorly run operation. They've always been. So am I surprised that now they're trying a gimmick? No, not even a little bit. Because this was a gimmick from the beginning. They put themselves in a hole right from the beginning. And the reason they did that is because they wanted to have the kind of power to dominate the workforce. And if you stop and you think about what Yellow was able to do, by putting themselves in peril, they were able to claw back 15, 20 years worth of advancements for working people. The wages are have been stagnated for years now. And they struggle to keep people and get people to come work for them. And I think that's going to get worse if they continue to do what they're doing. So am I surprised that the Teamsters have finally drawn a line in the sand after a couple of decades now of giving in? No, not at all. Equally, am I not surprised that a corporation is going to figure out how to use the court system to stick it to working people because we've allowed our political gurus to pack the court with the most corporate justices we can find? Absolutely not. So for all those people at Yellow and what used to be YRC and all those places who said, no, Trump's our guy, this lawsuit going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. Because they're not gonna bargain because they don't think they have to. And if this lawsuit does make it in front of the Supreme Court, it's a coin toss on what they do with it. And then what happens to collective bargaining rights? This is something that every worker should be concerned about. It's quite remarkable. But I appreciate the email. I appreciate the thoughts. I want to hear yours. If you've got a question, comment, something on your mind, something I said made you upset, by all means, shoot me an email, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Miss any portion of the program, grab the podcast. It is literally everywhere. You cannot find a podcast hosting site that we are not on. Grab it, share it with your friends. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.